guys. So, how are you? I just wanted to say, if you can't see me, I'm right here, but I wanted you to get most of the screen. So since we're not going to have time to go over the Good Earth and Pearl S. Buck background in class, I figured this would be the next best way to do that. So you will be able to go at your own pace and get the information as you like. This should be done either tonight, March 4th, at the very latest tomorrow night, March 5th, because you will have to start reading tomorrow night, March 5th. So, without further ado, The Good Earth by Pearl S. Buck. Pearl was born in 1892 in West Virginia to Absalom and Caroline Seidenstricker. She was very, very young, an infant, when they took her to China for the first time, and they were Christian missionaries, so that's really why they ended up going to China. If you don't know what that is, a missionary is somebody who goes and spreads their faith to other parts of the world. And so she spent a lot of her formidable years in China, while West Virginia was really important to her family, the land that they lived on. They felt that, their calling was really to go and be missionaries. So her parents took her to China when she was about 3 months old for the first time, and they lived there for several years. She was taught by her mom and a tutor, and then in about 3rd grade, they moved back to the United States for a little while. She did go to school in the United States then, but after that, then they moved back to China, and so she did spend most of her first 40 years living in China. And Pearl's Chinese governess told her many tales, many Chinese tales, and Pearl really fell in love with the culture and the people. So this is just an image of the Seidenstricker family. As you can see, the governess is also in the picture. So, in 1909, Pearl did attend school in Shanghai. And she volunteered at Door of Hope, which was a shelter for Chinese slave girls and prostitutes. It was around this time that she met and married John Lossing Buck, who she did meet in China. In 1917, they were married. And they lived their first few years of their marriage in a village full of impoverished farmers called Anhui. This became the setting, or at least the inspiration, for the setting of The Good Earth. Pearl and John had one daughter, Carol, who was developmentally disabled. They didn't notice it at first, but once it was noticed, they were able to get her placed in a school back in the United States that was a special school for other children with similar developmental challenges. And it was really one of the great sadnesses of Pearl's life that she had to send her daughter away to live in the United States, and that she couldn't be with her. It was after Carol was born that they found out Pearl was not going to be able to have any more children. And so Carol is Pearl and John's only biological child. Pearl and John did divorce in 1935 after a bit of a separation. Pearl went back to the United States after this divorce to be closer to Carol, who again was in that school for children who had developmental challenges. So some background information on the novel itself. In 1931, the novel appeared for the first time. Americans knew almost nothing about China at this point. And so really the main achievement of this novel is that it humanized Asians and Asian cultures for those in the West, because up until this point, unfortunately, Asians had been very stereotyped, and so the perception in the West was that they were drug addicts or cruel or dishonest, backward, or decadent, when in fact none of that was true. And Pearl really was one of the first people to show that that wasn't true. And so she really humanized the cultures of Asia to the Western world. The novel takes place in pre-World War I China, and it is really a turn of the century novel in terms of the setting and the time. It takes place at the beginning of the 20th century. It did win a Pulitzer Prize in fiction in 1932, and then later won the Nobel Prize in literature in 1938. Pearl Buck was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize for literature, so that makes her pretty special. So there is a movie, and yes, you will get to watch it. So it is controversial, however, because the main roles are not portrayed by Asian actors. So that makes it something that is, very difficult to watch in the modern era, because we are aware of those insensitive stereotypes, and unfortunately the movie is a little bit it shows a little bit of that stereotyping, but originally the movie rights were commanded for a record price at that time anyway, for $1 million. So $1 million in the 30s, that was quite a bit of money. And then Louise Rainier won Best Actress for her portrayal of Olan, which is the female lead in the movie. Pearl was a great humanitarian. She was very dismayed by the sexual caste system and the practices that evolved from this sexual caste system. Things such as infanticide, foot binding, inadequate education, and possession of concubines. So if you're unfamiliar, infanticide is the murdering of infants, and foot binding we'll talk more about in just a few minutes. Pearl spoke out against internment camps in the United States at a time when that wasn't exactly a popular opinion, so she did have principles and she stuck to them, and that is something that's very admirable about her. And then she founded Welcome House, which was the first international interracial adoption agency. So that's really interesting as well. So you're going to need to know what foot binding is, because we are going to see it in the novel. It will be mentioned several times in reference to Olan and her daughters. So, foot binding was an old Chinese custom in which young girls' feet were tightly bound to restrict and alter their growth. Although it was banned nearly a century ago by the Chinese government and is now seen as barbaric, the practice took years to die out, and a few of its victims, most far older than 70, can still be found today. Foot binding is thought to have originated in Imperial China in the 10th or 11th century, probably as a fashionable practice among wealthy women. Although its first adherents used it as a status symbol to indicate their high social rank, foot binding gradually spread throughout the culture. By the 12th century, even the poorest families practiced it. A little bit more about foot binding and how exactly it was practiced, the procedure, I guess, that really takes place. A young girl of about 3 years of age would have most of her toes fractured and her feet bound tightly with linen stripes to impede their growth. The ideal was to create a 3-inch lotus foot by limiting growth to just a few inches. The binding forced a girl's toes down toward the soles of her feet to form a concave shape. And then, so the practice became so pervasive that a woman whose feet had not been bound would have difficulty finding a husband. Most families demanded a woman with tiny feet when selecting a wife for their son. We're going to find out that Olan does not have bound feet, and we'll talk more about why exactly that is important and why that is really. Foot binding was banned in the early 20th century, and it was practiced for years in secret. Families were fearful that their daughters would not find husbands if their feet were not bound. So even though it was banned in the early 20th century, families still practiced it in secret because of this fear. These are just a few of the images of that lotus foot shape that they were looking for. So that is it. If you have any questions, please come to class and ask them. But again, you should make sure that you get these notes taken down either tonight, March 4th, or tomorrow night, March 5th. I hope this is helpful.